So let's come into a comfortable seated position to start. And I'm going to recommend you have a strap tonight, a blanket, a couple of blocks. And at the moment I'm sitting on a bolster. And I'm going to kneel on the bolster. So whether you kneel or sit cross-legged, or have a leg extended. So in the beginning of class, what I recommend is you try to find the position for you that feels somewhat stable and somewhat comfortable. So think of those two dimensions, stability and comfort. So stability, just gently rock from side to side, feel the sit bones ground down, and try to find that point where both sit bones are taking approximately the same weight. And the same with the front, back. You can even Rolodex the hips and feel the lumbar spine arch and tuck. And then try to find that midpoint between arch and tuck. And then you'll notice in the next progression that if you lift the rib cage up, you feel the ribs lift up. It's almost like the sit bones push down, ribs lift up. That what that will do is slightly tilt the pelvis forward if you're on the edge of whatever you're sitting on. Shoulders roll back and down, and let the arms relax. So a lot of the relaxation comes from the upper body, the shoulders, the arms, and the face, the jaw, the eyes. So that's where you want to feel the relaxation. And you want to feel the stability through the sit bones all the way up through the spine and the crown of the head. The head ramps back a little bit and up. So you're not lifting the chin, but you're lifting the back of the skull up. So this combination of relaxation and stability is often given the term in yoga as sthira sukha. And then notice the breath moving in and out of the body. Sometimes closing the eyes can help that awareness. And if the eyes would rather stay awake, letting the eyes become soft so that the attention isn't visual. The attention is kinesthetic, is a felt sense. Feeling the muscular movement, the sensations of the body, the expansion and contraction of the breath. And then letting the sensitivity come into the nostrils, feeling the flow of air come up through the nostrils, into the roof of the mouth, the back of the throat. So in that focused attention and posture, often you'll find a stillness. It's a good way to prepare the body for meditation. We're going to focus on the calves, the lower legs tonight. And the hips. And if possible, when we're holding the poses, come back to this sensitivity of feeling the breath in the nostrils letting the breath be gentle and slow, not rushed. On the next exhale, gently lean forward, remove whatever you're sitting on, and grab your strap. If you have blocks handy, grab the blocks. And if you have a blanket handy, grab the blanket. So with the blanket, I like to make a tri-fold out of this shape simply by taking the edge to the middle to the edge, and create what I call the burrito fold. And that's simply to bring the sit bones onto the edge of that blanket. So if I sat on it, there's a slight forward tilt. There's a slight forward tilt. And the blocks can be handy, as we'll see in a moment. Start by extending both legs into a V on the edge of your blanket. So there's a slight forward tilt. You can have your bolster handy or blocks. I'd say bolster is probably the better one for this. Now to get into the calves, we want to curl the toes back. So that's a very important part of this pose. And you want to find the right opening in the legs that feels good. Now, I want you to try and do the same pose with blocks underneath the knees. Blocks underneath the knees. Just notice the difference that brings to the pose. Keep the toes curled back so you keep that sensation on the calf muscles. Now, hinge forward a little bit and just notice how that feels, hinging forward. And then come back. Take your hands into the sides of the belly. I hope you haven't eaten too much recently. And pull the belly in and up with the hands. So you're getting the fleshy part of the belly away from the hip flexors. And now hinge forward again. And notice if that changed how far you come forward. Just by simply moving the fleshy part of the belly. Curl the toes back. And here's how you can use the bolster. You can bring the bolster to support the head. Now some people might find that their head is way down here somewhere, closer to the ground. Now this is also going to come into the hamstrings as well. Keep the toes curled back. And for those who are a little more flexible in the back of the legs, you can remove the blocks and do the very same pose without the knees elevated. Your hands might slide down the shins. They might hold the toes. Sometimes when you hold the toes, it can remind the toes to come out, push out through the heels so that it comes back into the calf muscles. Also feeling this in the hips. We call this dragonfly pose in yin yoga. Couple more breaths, feeling the air come in and out of the nose. And when you decide to come out, bring the hands to the top of the bolster if you've been using the bolster, and push against the bolster to come back up. So the hands pull you back up. Take a moment to bend the knees and give the back of the hamstrings a rub, the back of the calf muscles a rub. And then extend the right leg out to the right and tuck the left foot up into the thigh of that right side. Once again, think about the block as an option to support the back of the knee. Create a little rotation towards that extended right leg. And hinge forward. Hinge forward. Towards that right foot. Now your hands might be up here near the knee. They might be near the foot. And then come back up. Take your hands into the belly. Move the fleshy part of the belly towards the center of the belly. So you're creating a little space here. And now hinge forward again with the belly moved out of position. And notice if that brings the hinge a little further forward. And then come on up. Anybody noticing that difference by move? Yeah, that's right. It's a big difference. So moving the fleshy part gives that forward fold a lot more opportunity to come forward. So now we're going to use the strap around that extended foot. We're going to hold the pose a little longer. You have the option of keeping the block where it is or removing it. If the block is helpful, use it. I'm going to hold the strap with the left hand and use the right hand to move the belly. Sit up nice and tall, belly out of the way, hinge forward, and find your hands down on the strap to the extent that that feels tolerable, maybe delicious, maybe a little edgy, depending on what feels right for your body tonight. Keep working the toes back. This is where we're going to help the calf muscle by bringing the toes back. So even though there's an emphasis on the posterior muscles of the extended right leg, you'll feel this in the low back. You'll feel this in the hips. And the more you come forward, the more sensation you will discover. You can get more sensation by moving the hands closer to the foot and keeping the toes coming back towards the chest. You can get more sensation by removing the block or lowering the block as well. And then when you're settled in the position, come into the breath, the awareness of the breath in and out of the nose. You can think pushing out through the heel bone is another way to get that calf muscle stretch. You can think of bringing the back of the knee down closer to the ground, pressing into the block or pressing into the ground is another way to increase the release in the calf muscle and the hamstring. You can't leave the hamstring out when we're getting into the calf muscle. They come right together. Both of them helping that knee extension, the ability of the knee to open up 2 more breaths here. And on the second breath, let the hands walk back along the leg. Let the hands slowly bring you back. You want to be gradual and gentle as you come back on that low back area. You can pick that right knee up, maybe noticing a contrast between left and right side. Let's try the other side. So remember, the leg starts out in the splits position, like we were doing in dragonfly, but now we're bending the right knee. Right foot against. Now let's say that right knee is up in the air like that. Use a block, support it, right? So we don't want to be fighting anything, because our main emphasis is on the back of the leg and the low back here. Rotate towards that extended leg, come forward. Notice your range of motion on this side. Notice how the calf muscle is. Once again, you can decide to support the back of the knee with a block. That gives you a little more forward ability. And then come up, tuck the hands, bring the hands into the left belly, push it to the center, hinge forward. Bingo! Look how much more range of motion that gives. And then we'll combine that with the strap and the hinge. So strap over the foot. Right hand can move the belly towards the center, hinge forward. Hands can come down to the strap. And then we're on the clock. Now, anybody watching you from the outside won't notice some of the tiny movements that you can make here. Remember, the tiny movements are bringing the toes back towards the shin. Nobody will see that. You will feel it. Nobody will see it. You could work on bringing the crown of the head towards the toes. Again, nobody might see, but you will feel that small movement lengthening through the spine. Nobody will see if you push the back of the knee down into the block or the earth, but you will feel that. So you're making these tiny, tiny efforts which are generating and magnifying sensations considerably. From the outside, someone would just think you're still and relaxed. Even breathing will magnify the sensations as you inhale. Feel how that gives a little more zing to the stretch as you push the heel away from you. All these little ways of sustaining the stretch, holding, allowing, and breathing, and relaxing. Relaxing shoulders, arms, and face. So we have about 3 more breaths here. And on the third breath, simply walk the hands back up the leg. Yes, we were focusing on the back of the legs and the low back, but the hips have been wide open this whole time. Been a lot of adduction or abduction, stretching the adductors this whole time. So we're going to come down onto the back now, a little prone work. Did I say on the back? Let's see. I think I'm going to change that. We'll come into a midway position first. So standing the feet on the edges of the mat. Start to rock the knees from side to side. So releasing the side of the hips. The next time the knees come all the way over to the left, sit up nice and tall. Use your hands and start to turn the torso towards the left. Feel that in the spine. And then come all the way to the other side. And then exhale, release. Now, hinge forward, but take your right foot across the mat to the left side. Drop your right knee onto the mat and your right sit bone and lean into the right side of the body and bend your left knee behind you. So both knees are bent. You've got the outside of the front leg on the mat, the inside of the back leg on the mat, back leg behind you, and lean onto the elbow for a moment. If that's too uncomfortable, bring a block underneath your elbow and just lean on the block. So elbow on block or mat. Take a moment to try and arrange the shin of the front foot to be parallel to the top of the mat. Feel the rib cage on the inner thigh and then come back up and take your left hand into the flesh of the belly and just move the flesh of the belly up and to the center and then come back down. And notice again, does that allow you to come down a little lower? Just by moving the belly, this time perhaps both the elbows on the ground. Once again, if the elbow doesn't reach the ground, you could support it with a cushion or a blanket or the block. So we're really coming to the outside of the right hip now. We're coming into the right outer side of that front leg along the IT band. And the way to grow sensation here is to start to separate the hands diagonally away from the head, like the racks of a big deer. This is called deer pose. Now my head cannot reach the ground, so I'm going to take a block. I'm going to rest my head on the block. So ribs on the front thigh, head on the block, antlers reaching away from the head. So many choices. Your elbows can be down. You can have the head up more. You could even bring the bolster on top of the block or a blanket, so your head's up higher. And then start to become aware once again of the movement of breath in and out, and the sensations that generates. And even though it's not so easy, you can slow the breath down. And to come out of the pose, bend the elbows, bring the hands back first, let the hands pick you up by pushing into the mat. Whoo! Feeling that deer pose, on the right side. Well, you pretty much guess where we're going to go now. You're going to reorient to the left side of the mat. Again, little knees, windshield wipering. Hinge forward and bring the left foot across the mat, the left knee onto the mat, lean into the left side, and bring the right knee behind you. So you have this groundedness in the left hip, left knee, left foot. Everything's on the ground. And that way you can lean into the left elbow either on a block, a cushion, a blanket, or your hand. Your elbow might come all the way to the ground. Feel how the belly impacts against the thigh. Come on up. Dig your hand into the belly and gently pull the fleshy part of the belly towards the center of the belly. So as you come back down, you might find you go further and deeper. Head could rest on the block. The block can be at any height. Start to feel the sensations on the left outer hip. Feeling the weight of the torso pushing down into the inner thigh, which is ideally creating pressure on the outer thigh, squeezing it against the mat. So we're really getting, one would almost feel a self-myofascial release here, as the fascia on the outside of the thigh is being pressed into the mat. To enhance, simply walk your antlers away from the head and breathe. And once again, we're focused on the hips. But as we reach the antlers out, the shoulders get a release, the shoulder blades. And the inner and outer thighs of the legs. The low back. Each breath brings a wave of sensation. And just notice if you can surf that wave. Stay with the sensation. Not to fight it, not to force your way through it, but to go with the breath. Feel the sensation wax and wane. Come out, walk the hands back, press the hands into the mat, and then slowly come up. Ooh, hello. There's a little hip array. And then of course we couldn't do hips without doing half frog. So with half frog, bring the blanket out to the side of the mat, unless you have a carpeted floor, and it's totally fine. We're going to come down onto the belly. And if you have any issues with the belly, you can always, it's a nice little trick I learned in my training, you could always use something, maybe not as high as a bolster, but something like a blanket. You could use a blanket and bring your hip bones down onto the blanket so it creates a little space for the belly. So if you have any issues with the belly here, coming down, you can elevate the sit bones a little bit. And then bring that left knee out onto the blanket, left ankle down. And start by bringing the elbows out to the sides into goalpost arms, having the side of the head grounded on the mat. Noticing how that feels in the neck. Yes, I said the neck, even though we're focused on the hips. Notice how the neck feels in this position. Option here to stack the hands and rest the forehead on stacked hands. So that should deal with any neck issues. With the left knee extended out to the side, bent, consider bringing one or two hands behind your back. I like to tuck the right hand under the waistline of the pants and the left hand to grab the right wrist on this side. This is going to put pressure on the low back, and it might be a pressure that feels delicious or not. It also adds a little more torque to the neck. And I like to think of the gold standard here as, can I relax the shoulders and breathe slowly? If the answer is yes, then I'm in a position that's appropriate, as long as there's no pain. If not, make an adjustment that feels good. So the hips are getting a lot of work tonight. We started with the calf muscle, and right now you could come back into the calf muscle simply by curling the toes back towards the shin on the left side. So that left bent knee, curl the toes back and you'll feel the calf muscle stretching. So even in this position, we can keep a little stretch sensation on that left calf. slow, gentle breaths through the nose. 5 more breaths. On the 5th exhale, releasing the hands, kick the knee out if you can for a little longer. Stack the hands, rest the forehead on the stacked hands. Create a little rolling sensation in the temple across the hands, left and right. And then bring the elbows underneath the shoulders. Notice how that feels. So you've gone into a little deeper back bend. It's going to add a little more to that left hip opening. If that's too much, come back to crocodile. And if you'd like a little more, bring the elbows out wider, hands to the edges of the mat, and begin to straighten the arms. That's going to add a considerable set of sensations to the inside of the left hip, the right hip flexor, and the low back. And then slowly come back. Bring the left knee back. And just notice your hips on the left side and the right side. Let's try that whole sequence on the other side. So bringing the right knee out to the side, supporting it on a blanket if that's available. Coming into goalpost with the head turned in the opposite direction from last time. And when that right hip feels settled, you can invite the arms behind the back. So you can see how I position my hands. My left hand is grabbing the right wrist. By now, for me, the weight of the arms on the low back feels really delicious. I like it. Shoulders are relaxed. Breath is gentle and slow. The rotation in my neck feels fine. Check, 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 check. And if there's anything in any of those positions that does not feel good, what could you do? How could you make an adjustment to take the pressure off that part of the body right now? Slow, gentle breath. Relaxed shoulders. Relaxed jaw. If you're fortunate, you might find the ear that's against the mat can hear the heartbeat. It's always a bonus when you're in a yoga position or shape, when you can feel or hear the heartbeat. You know your attention is deep inside the body at that point. That wonderful heart muscle that has pumped continuously, night and day, every second, for decades. Exhale, releasing the hands, and then stack the hands, resting the forehead on the stacked hands. Notice if that right knee wants to go out a little further here, opening up a little more after all that time, or not. Roll from temple to temple, release the neck. And then you have your options to remain here. If you've had enough hip opening, you can bring the knee in, or you can come onto the elbows. And then up into seal pose, bringing the hands to the edge of the mat, straightening. So a few options here to close the pose, the shape. When you're ready, let the elbows come down, knee come back, and feel both sides of the hips now. Hopefully there's a little more symmetry in the two sides of the hip. And then bring the hands under the shoulders and bring the knees forward and wide and bring up bolster right down between the thighs for a moment. And then sink back into child pose, resting your head on the bolster or pillows, maybe a block. So we don't often think of child pose as a hip opener, but as you're there in child pose, start to let the knees come out a little wider and start to feel how it absolutely can be a hip opener. You can rest the chin on the bolster, or you can have the head turned in one direction. with the toenails on the mat, with the top of the feet on the mat, the calf muscles are now being contracted. So toes are pointing down, heels are lifted up. So the calf muscles are getting not a stretch, but a contraction here. If your head has been turned to one side, turn it to the other side. And as you're ready, you can bring the hands under the shoulders and start to come up. And come onto your sit bones. And we're going to come down onto the back. Onto the back. So if you need head support, you've got your blanket. You can keep your bolster handy. In fact, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to come into the hips again. Sorry about that. Roll to one side and come up. Have your bolster behind you. So you'll notice if you look at my bolster, it's behind my back, running lengthways. And you can have your blanket handy. And sit so that your spine is about 1 fist distance from the bolster. Now, if you don't have a bolster, you could use a couple of blankets rolled up that are the length of the spine. You could have a series of cushions. But the main thing is the hips stay on the ground and you gently come back into your lumbar arch. Check in with the 2 endpoints of the spine. That's the most important parts right now. If your neck feels uncomfortable, take the blanket and bring it under the back of the skull. That's going to take the compression off the cervical vertebra. If your low back is not enjoying this, you could bring a blanket or a towel folded up underneath the buttocks, and that it will alleviate that lumbar arch. Walk the feet back for a moment and bring the kneecaps together. Feet are wide, kneecaps together, creating a triangular shape, teepee pose. The shape of a teepee, knees at the top of the teepee, feet at the base, supporting the lumbar spine. That is not a hip opening, but it is support for the low back. I want you to have that as a reference point that you can come back to if at any time what we're about to do is uncomfortable. I'm going to recommend you have blocks handy. Now bring the soles of the feet together and let the knees come out into your butterfly pose. So here we've come into a hip opening. We've done a lot of hip opening tonight. If this is uncomfortable, try bringing the blocks underneath the thighs to support the thighs. So your blocks are taking pressure off the internal thighs. If that works for you, remain there, knowing you can always sidle the blocks further away from each other as the hips release. So you can always explore a deeper, slow, gradual opening. If this is even too much for you, you can return to TP shape. And whatever shape you decide on, consider your arm position. I like to have the palms facing upwards, but you might not. You might like it downwards. There's a certain angle that I find the arms feels just right, away from the hips. So this is a sustained back bend, supported back bend. It's a supported hip opening. It's a chest opener. It gives optimal lung expansion capability. What would it be like to explore deeper breathing right now? Not faster, not aggressive, but longer, sustained. Feeling the rib cage expand in all directions, almost until you feel the lungs pushing up through the throat, lifting the collarbones. And then a slow, gentle release, unhurried. So we turn this back bend into a restorative pose. A pose that can help grow our lung capacity. Growing the lung capacity is something that you can do into your 60s and 70s. We don't have to let the lung capacity diminish. We can keep it growing. And this is a wonderful way to grow it. Now, because this is a restorative pose, you can choose to stay here for as long as you like. We're not in a studio. You're in your own home. So choose whether you're staying or transitioning in your own time. You don't even have to choose right now. For those who are transitioning, you can bring the knees up, soles of the feet onto your mat. Turning onto one side of the body, either remaining on the bolster or not. Supporting the head. And then gently supporting yourself as you come up to a seated position. Either the same as you began class or different. I'm going to choose a different position. Easy seated pose. And taking these last few breaths of our practice to simply notice how the restorative back bend helps create a shape that feels effortless as I sit up. Feeling the length of the spine. So thanking the hips and the calves for showing up today. Bring the hands together in prayer. Let the head bow in gratitude for our practice and each other's company. Namaste. I'll just turn the recording off for the patrons, and then we can say good night.